Today, we're going to talk about why one of the most popular expressions in all of management is a huge mistake and why you should embrace it. I'm certified financial planner Steve Wershing, and welcome back to 30-Minute Money. Peter Drucker is credited with one of the most popular expressions in management, and that is what gets measured gets managed. But there are lots of problems with that expression. First of all, Peter Drucker never said it, at least that's according to the Drucker Institute. But more importantly, it's often wrong. It puts too much emphasis on measurement and not enough on accomplishment. There are lots of examples how this kind of expression can go wrong, especially in the area of artificial intelligence. People who program in artificial intelligence keep lists of these kinds of things because it gives them a laugh, and you can find all of those on a spreadsheet out on the internet. One of the ones that is humorous is they tried to program a toy boat to optimize for the statistic that they thought would get it to go in the straightest direction and at the most optimum speed, and of course it ended up driving itself constantly in circles. One of the biggest problems, frankly, with that expression of what gets measured gets managed is a more enlightened expression that came after that, which is not everything that matters can be measured. Not everything that's measured matters. That's particularly true in financial planning. One of the things that sort of frustrates me about my colleagues periodically is their overemphasis on numbers. We do that because numbers are easy to track. We can crunch numbers. We can put them through computers and do fancy things with numbers. And here's the problem. Financial planning is not about numbers. Financial planning is about achieving the life you really want. And those real goals can't be measured. Things like more time with your family, like having adventures, traveling all over the world. All of those kinds of things are really the point of financial planning, but there are too many financial plans where you will not see that stuff appear. They'll talk about, here's your retirement goal, here is your travel goal, and it's all about the numbers. It's not about accomplishing what you really want to accomplish. Still, you should embrace that mistake. There are some fundamental truths to what gets measured gets managed, and this is why you should adopt that that slogan, at least for part of your financial plan. One of the most common concerns, one of the most common frustrations that I hear when people come into my office is, I don't know where I stand. I'm not sure even where I am before I set out on this adventure to get where I want to go. So achieving financial goals, getting on a path to your goals, requires that you know where you start, that you know where you are, and that can be complicated. Now, if we're talking about a long-term goal, one of the things that we talk about in field of vision planning is that we don't want to overanalyze long-term goals, because really any calculation, any projection beyond 5 years is pretty much fantasy. But still, you need to know where you're starting if you're going to have any idea of how to get where you want to go ultimately. And you need to know whether or not you are making some progress. You know, whether you're making enough progress actually is the next question. The first question is, are you making progress at all? So that's why we want to embrace the rule of what gets measured gets managed, because when you start down your financial journey, you're going to make a few measurements. The first step really in our field of vision process is that you need to measure what you own and what you owe and where the money goes every month. Those are three things that you should measure, that are worth measuring. Those are not the things that will tell you whether or not you are going to achieve your goals, but they are the necessary starting point. So, you know, and these days it's even more important because it's a lot harder now to know that than it used to be. When I was starting out, when I was first getting into the working world after I graduated from school, it was pretty easy because everything sort of in the end had to go through your checking account. We wrote checks to pay bills every month, and you got a statement at the end of the month that showed you where all the money went and how much you had. Now, even if you didn't even if you weren't meticulous about balancing your checkbook, and full disclosure, I was not always that careful about balancing my checkbook, you still had a pretty good idea of where you stood, because when you looked at that statement, and you needed to look at that statement so that you didn't overdraw your checking account, you knew, you had some idea of where you were. But that's not the case as much anymore. Now we have all kinds of credit cards, we have PayPal, we have Venmo, we have all kinds of other ways that money goes into and out of our possession. And especially if you've worked in a few different places, you know, you may have 401k holdings in a few different places as separate from your IRAs. I mean, it really can be a confusing mess. It's easy to lose track. So the challenge remains, the challenge, you know, of knowing what you own and what you owe and where the money goes remains. It's just a lot harder to know these days. The other thing that's really important about that is that you need to remind yourself regularly. You need to work that into your subconscious. You need to be able to, if you needed to think of it, or if somebody asked you, you know, how much do you have? What's your net worth? You should really be able to say fairly closely what that is, because that familiarity will give you some sense of where you stand as you start working toward, whether it be short or long-term goals. In Field of Vision, we recommend that you look at it every month, that once a month you look at that number, and you can do it a little more frequently if you want to. You don't want to over-obsess over it. You don't want to be looking at CNBC and tracking your portfolio every single day. But if you want to look a little more frequently, you can. But the main thing is that you know what that number is on a regular basis, and that you remind yourself, so that you become an expert in it, that you know right off the top of your head about what you're worth and about how much goes out every month. So we also may spread money across different kinds of accounts. So you may have a regular bill paying account. That might be your checking account. You may have a separate cash reserve account. That's a good idea, because we don't want to accidentally drain our emergency fund because we weren't paying close enough attention. We want that set to the side. So that might be in a separate account. You know, you might have accounts for short-term goals. If you know you want to buy a new car in a year or two, that might be in a separate account. So there needs to be some kind of way that you can pull all that information together and remind yourself once a month how much you have. That also goes true for the cash as it leaves your hands, as you pay bills with it, as it goes back out of your household. You want to make sure that you don't necessarily need to analyze it. You know, eventually, as you work into it, it's a good idea to know how much goes out to each category, how much you spend for utilities, how much you spend in gasoline, how much you spend eating out, how much you spend in groceries. It's good to know that, but where you start is just by knowing how much goes out in total. And you want to do that with actual data, because when clients come in and we start doing some goal setting, and we start laying out, and people say, well, I've got a pretty good idea. I'll make a list of my bills every month and I'll write it all out. Those clients can be off as much as 50%. They're off by half. So that's not terribly useful. If you think you know how much is going out every month, but you're off by half, okay, so that's not very helpful. So now that we have a more complicated life, how do we do it? Well, thankfully, while life has gotten more complicated, we've also gotten more tools. And so you can use technology to do that. For our clients, when we put them into our planning system can go into all of those accounts and pull it out. Those are the accounts that we manage, and also the accounts that they have on the outside. But there are lots of systems like that. You might use Quicken or Microsoft Money, or some other kind of system like that. It might be that your credit card, if you pay most everything through a particular credit card, that credit card might send you a report at the end of the year that breaks down what you spent across all kinds of categories. But more importantly, you can look at that credit card statement once a month and know pretty much where all that money went. So what we recommend is that you leverage that technology, that if you can't do it through a single source like a credit card, that you sign up for a service like Quicken, or like there are financial planning tools out there that you can sign up for, that you can hook your accounts up to, and all of those will download. That you do that so that you have a place where you can find all of the information quickly. If you have to go researching each individual account, if you have to gather all the statements together and add them all up and figure out what the total is of your net worth, and then figure out the total of what all the money was that went out every month, and it takes you more than just a few minutes, you probably won't stick with it. That's just what we find in behavioral finance. If people have to work hard to get all that stuff together, it's the first thing that they will procrastinate on, the first thing that they will put off. So we have great technology. Use it. Hook your accounts up to one of those sources and download all the information into one place, so that with a couple of clicks of a mouse, you can access, you can get a total on how much you own, how much you owe to all of your credit cards, mortgages, car loans, all that kind of stuff, and how much money has gone out of the house. That's where all financial planning begins. In finance, we of course have names for that. What you own and what you owe is put together on something called a balance sheet, and where all the money goes is on something called an income statement, or the slang for it is a profit and loss statement. Now, you're a household, so you don't actually have profit, but it's the same kind of thing. It lists all the sources of income, lists all the expenses, all the things that money go out, all the things that money goes out to. And you want to be an expert in both of those things. And so you want to set a reminder for yourself once a month. Put something in your calendar that says, this is that time when I sit down for 15 or 30 minutes and I download all those things, or I access the system that is downloading them, and I can see, here's how much I own altogether, here's how much I owe altogether. And you can track that over time and see if you're systematically doing better. And again, you don't have to break it all down and analyze it at the very start. The first step is just knowing where it is and how much it is. And even before you start getting into it, before you start analyzing it, if you just list that number once a month, put it on a spreadsheet, put it in a journal, and take a look at it once a month, so that you get an idea not only what you own and what you owe, not only what your net worth is today, but you can see where you have been the last few months, and you can see what kind of a trend you're on, what kind of progress you're making. That's really the first step in getting full control of your finances, so that if you ever wanted to think of it, if anyone were ever to ask, you would know right off the top of your head how much you have, how much you owe, and where all the money goes. Knowing where you are and what's normal for you in terms of how much goes out of the household. We don't have to make any judgments at this point. We don't have to start making decisions about that. Just knowing where it goes is the first step. That's the natural, normal starting point for all financial planning. So your 30-minute action item this time, is to make sure you have a list of all your accounts. Make sure you've hooked them up someplace so that they download, so that you can access it easily, so that you can work toward developing a habit where you can sit down and spend 15 to 30 minutes. And very quickly, actually, once you get it all set up, you should be able to just sit down and access it in a minute or two, know everything that you own, everything that you owe, and what's normal for you in terms of how much money goes back out of the household. That is your 30-minute tip for this week. I'm Steve Wershing. Thanks for joining me at 30 Minute Money.